What would you do if a complete stranger offered to pay off your entire debt and asked for absolutely nothing in return? Would you trust him? Or would you slam the door in his face? Malene Winters had exactly 3 days before the bank would auction off her family ranch. 3 days before strangers would walk through the home where her mother sang her lullabies. 3 days before she lost everything her father built with his bare hands. She had no money, no family left, no hope. And then he appeared. A man from her past, a man with a violent secret, a man who owed her dead father a debt that money could never repay. He offered her $2,000 in gold coins, no strings attached. But here is the thing about gifts that seem too good to be true. They usually are. Or are they? What happened next would change both of their lives forever. And by the end of this story, you will understand why sometimes the person we trust the least becomes the one we need the most. This story will remind you of a powerful truth. Every person deserves a second chance. The measure of who we are is not the mistakes we make, but whether we have the courage to rise after we fall. And sometimes, the home we have been searching for was never a place at all. It was a person. It was a choice. It was the decision to stop running and finally stay. If you have ever felt lost, if you have ever wondered whether your best days are behind you, this story is for you. If you believe in second chances, drop a comment below and tell me about a time when someone believed in you when you did not believe in yourself. And if this story touches your heart today, share it with a friend who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that will warm your soul and remind you that love always finds a way. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let me take you back to Texas in the summer of 1876. This is the debt of the heart. The crack of the auctioneer gavel echoed across the dusty yard of the Lazy W Ranch like a gunshot. Malene stood frozen on the porch of the house where she had taken her first steps, where her mama had sung her lullabies before the fever took her, where her daddy had taught her to read by candlelight and promised her that this land would always be hers. Now, strangers in fancy suits from Brownsville were walking through her home, opening her mama's china cabinet, running their fingers along her daddy's desk, calculating how much they could squeeze from her family's legacy. The bank representative was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles named Silas Jenkins. He had the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled a day in its life. "Final notice," Jenkins announced, his voice flat as week-old beer. $2,000 owed to the First National Bank of Brownsville. Property to be auctioned in 3 days unless debt is settled in full. Malene stepped forward, her worn brown dress swaying in the hot Texas breeze. "Mr. Jenkins, please." Her voice was steady, even though her heart was pounding like a war drum. "My father built this ranch from nothing after the war. We have been doing business with your bank for over 20 years. Surely you can extend the deadline just one more time." Jenkins adjusted his spectacles and finally looked at her. There was something like pity in his eyes, but it was buried deep beneath years of saying no to desperate people. "Miss Winters, I have already extended your deadline twice. The drought has affected everyone in South Texas, not just you. The bank's patience has run out." He mounted his horse without another word and trotted away, leaving Malene standing there with the foreclosure notice nailed to her gate like a death sentence. She was 26 years old. She had no husband, no family left, and no way to come up with $2,000 in 3 days. The drought that had plagued South Texas for nearly 2 years had slowly drained everything her family had built. First, she sold off half the cattle herd just to keep the remaining animals fed and watered. Then the ranch hands drifted away one by one, seeking work on ranches that could still pay wages. Her daddy had died the previous winter. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but Malene knew the truth. George Winters died of a broken heart. He died watching his beloved ranch wither and crack under the merciless Texas sun. He died knowing he was leaving his only child with nothing but debt and dust. Malene walked back inside the house, her boots kicking up little clouds of dirt from soil that used to be rich and dark and full of life. Maria, the elderly Mexican woman who had helped raise Malene after her mama passed, looked up from the kitchen with worried eyes. What did the bank man say, Mija? Maria had been with the family for over 20 years. She was more grandmother than hired help, and right now her weathered face was creased with concern. Malene sank into her daddy's old leather chair, the one that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco. 3 days, she said quietly. Then they auction everything. Dios mío. Maria crossed herself. What will we do? I do not know. Malene stared at the ceiling, blinking back the tears she refused to let fall. She had cried enough when her daddy died. She had cried enough when the last of the ranch hands rode away. She was done crying. Now she needed to think. I have written to every relative we have, she continued. Cousin Eleanor in San Antonio cannot help. Uncle Thomas in Houston says times are hard for everyone. I have tried to sell more cattle, but the prices are so low it would not even make a dent in what we owe. She closed her eyes. This land is all I have left of them, Maria, of my father, of the grandfather I never knew who first claimed this land. I cannot lose it, not lose. Maria placed a gentle hand on Malene's shoulder. Perhaps a miracle will come, Mija. Your father always said God watches over fools in winters. Malene managed a weak smile at the old family joke. I think we need more than God right now, Maria. We need $2,000 in gold coins. That night, Malene could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind moan through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the smell of dust and dying grass. The ranch house creaked and groaned like an old man with aching bones. She thought about all the offers she had received over the years. Martin Crawford from the neighboring ranch had proposed marriage 3 times. He was handsome enough in a soft, pampered kind of way, and his family had money. But there was something in his eyes that Malene did not trust, something cold and calculating beneath his easy smile. She had said no each time. Now she wondered if that had been pride talking instead of sense. But no. Her daddy had always told her that a woman should never sell herself short. Not for money, not for security, not for anything. He had married her mama for love, pure and simple, and he had never regretted it, even when times got hard. I would rather lose this ranch than lose myself, Malene whispered into the darkness. But even as she said the words, her heart ached at the thought of strangers living in her home, plowing her fields, erasing every trace of the winter's family from this land. Morning came too quickly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock her misery. Malene dressed in her best brown cotton dress, the one with the least amount of patches, and rode into Brownsville on her mare Penny. The horse was getting old, but she was steady and sure-footed, and right now, Malene needed something steady in her life. The dusty streets of Brownsville were busy with the usual morning traffic. Merchants opening their shops, ranchers in town for supplies, soldiers from Fort Brown walking in pairs. Malene tied Penny outside the general store and stepped inside, a little bell above the door announcing her arrival. "Morning, Miss Winters," called Otto Schmidt from behind the counter. Otto was a round-faced German immigrant who had run the general store for as long as Malene could remember. His expression held that same pitying look everyone in town had been giving her lately. News traveled fast in a small town. "Morning, Mr. Schmidt. I need some coffee and flour, please. The smallest amounts you sell." Schmidt nodded and gathered her items, his movements slow and deliberate. "Heard about the bank notice," he said quietly. "Terrible business, that. Your father was a good man. Helped me when I first came to Texas. Gave me credit when no one else would." Malene nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Too bad the bank does not believe in people the same way your father did," Schmidt continued, wrapping her small purchases. "That will be 50 cents. Malene was counting out her last coins when the shop door opened behind her, bringing a blast of hot air and trail dust. She did not look up until she heard Schmidt's surprised greeting. "Well, well, well. Look what the wind blew in. Nathan Forrester. I thought you had left these parts for good." Malene turned to see a tall man removing his hat as he entered the store. He was covered in trail dust, his clothes worn and practical. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, curling slightly at the collar of his faded blue shirt. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and when he smiled at Schmidt, the corners of his striking blue eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "Hello, Otto," the stranger said, his voice deep and pleasant. "Just passing through on my way to San Antonio." Malene recognized the name immediately. Nathan Forrester. He had been the foreman at the Cross T Ranch years ago before she went away to school in Austin. There had been some kind of trouble before he left. Something about a fight in a saloon and a man nearly killed. But Malene had only heard rumors and whispers. She had been 18 the last time she saw him. He had tipped his hat to her at a town social, but they had never properly spoken. That was 8 years ago. Now here he was, appearing out of nowhere like a ghost from the past. "Nathan," Schmidt said cheerfully. "You remember Malene Winters, George Winters' daughter?" Those blue eyes turned to look at her, and for a moment Malene felt like she was being weighed and measured. Then recognition dawned on his face. "Miss Winters," he said with a respectful nod, "it has been a long time. 8 years, I believe." He remembered. That surprised her. "I was sorry to hear about your father," Nathan continued. "I got the news when I was passing through El Paso last month. He was a good man, one of the best I ever knew." "Thank you," Malene replied automatically. She had said those words so many times over the past months that they had lost all meaning. An awkward silence fell over the store until Schmidt cleared his throat. "Nathan here struck it rich in Colorado," he announced with obvious pride. "One of the lucky ones who actually found gold instead of just frostbite and disappointment." Nathan shrugged modestly. "Lucky enough." Malene gathered her small purchases and nodded politely to both men. "Good day, gentlemen. Welcome back to Texas, Mr. Forrester." She left the store quickly, not wanting to make small talk about her misfortune with strangers. But as she untied Penny from the hitching post, she heard the door open behind her and footsteps approaching. "Miss Winters, wait." She turned to find Nathan Forrester following her, hat in hand, looking almost nervous. "I do not mean to pry," he said carefully. "But Otto mentioned something about bank trouble at the Lazy W." Malene stiffened, her spine going rigid. "Mr. Schmidt should learn to mind his own business. He meant no harm." Nathan's voice was gentle. "It is just that your father did me a good turn once, a very big turn, actually. If there is anything I might do to help, I would consider it an honor." Malene looked at him for a long moment. He was handsome. She could not deny that. But she had learned long ago that handsome men with easy smiles could not be trusted. "Unless you happen to have $2,000 you would like to donate to a complete stranger, Mr. Forrester, I do not think there is anything you can do." The words came out sharper than she intended. But instead of taking offense, Nathan simply tilted his head and considered her with those impossible blue eyes. "How long do you have?" Malene sighed, suddenly exhausted. "The auction is in 2 days. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a ranch to lose." She mounted Penny and rode away without looking back. She did not see Nathan Forrester standing in the dusty street watching her until she disappeared from view. And she certainly did not see the thoughtful expression on his face as he turned and walked toward the First National Bank of Brownsville. That evening, Malene sat on the front porch of her family home, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of gold and crimson, colors so beautiful they almost hurt to look at. The drought-stricken land stretched out before her, brown and cracked where it used to be green and lush. Everything felt like a goodbye. Maria had gone to bed early, exhausted from worry and age. The house behind Malene was quiet, except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw the rider. Someone was approaching the ranch, and the sun was almost down. Visitors were rare enough during the day. At dusk, they were practically unheard of. Malene reached for the shotgun her daddy had always kept by the front door. She did not cock it, but she held it where it could be seen. A rider emerged from the gathering shadows, silhouetted against the dying light. As he drew closer, She recognized the broad shoulders and easy posture of Nathan Forrester. Of all people. "Evening, Miss Winters," he called out, dismounting at a respectful distance from the porch. He kept his hands visible and away from his sides, the gesture of a man who understood that unexpected visitors were not always welcome. "Mr. Forrester," Meline acknowledged, keeping the shotgun visible but pointed at the ground. "It is a long ride from town this time of day. What brings you all the way out here?" "I wanted to speak with you," he said, removing his hat. "In private, if possible. Whatever you have to say can be said right here on this porch." Nathan nodded, respecting her caution. "Fair enough. I want to help with your bank situation, as I said in town. Unless you have 2,000. "I have the money," he interrupted quietly. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Meline stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I can pay off your debt," Nathan continued. "All of it. The bank, the foreclosure, everything. Your ranch stays yours free and clear." For a long moment, Meline could not speak. Then suspicion flooded through her like ice water. "Why?" she demanded. "What do you want in return? The land?" "Because if you think I am going to." "I do not want anything," Nathan said firmly. "Not the land. Not a stake in the ranch. Nothing. Then why would you do this? Nobody gives away $2,000 to a stranger without expecting something in return." Nathan sighed and stepped a little closer. In the fading light, his face looked weary but determined. 8 years ago, I got into a bad situation. A saloon fight that went too far. A man named Richard Tanner. I hit him harder than I meant to, and he fell badly, cracked his head on the corner of a table. For a while, they thought he might die. Meline remembered Richard Tanner, an irritable older man who lived on a small ranch north of town. She remembered seeing him with a sling on his arm, and later hearing that he never regained full use of it. "Your father was friends with Tanner," Nathan continued. "He had every right to see me arrested, maybe even hanged. Instead, he came to me the night before the sheriff planned to take me in. Said he had spoken to Tanner and his family. Said if I left town immediately and never came back, there would be no charges." Meline felt something shift in her chest. That did sound like her daddy, always seeing the best in people, even when they did not deserve it. "He told me something I have never forgotten," Nathan said, his voice dropping lower. "He said violence is easy, but living with its consequences is hard. He said he thought I was better than my worst mistake. He said sometimes a man needs a second chance to become the person he ought to be." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through Meline's heart. "I took that second chance," Nathan continued. "Went to Colorado. Worked harder than I ever worked in my life. Got lucky in the gold fields near Central City. Spent 6 years building something from nothing." He paused. "Now I have more money than I need, and an opportunity to repay a debt that has been weighing on my conscience for 8 years. Your father saved my life, Miss Winters. Maybe not in the way you usually think of saving someone, but he gave me a future when I had none. The least I can do is make sure his daughter does not lose her home." Meline did not know what to say. She wanted to refuse. Every ounce of pride in her body screamed that she should not accept charity from a stranger, no matter how pretty his words were. But $2,000, that was not charity, that was a miracle. "So this is about clearing your conscience," she finally said, "making yourself feel better about the past." "Maybe partly," Nathan admitted. "But it is also about doing what is right. Your father believed in me when he had absolutely no reason to. I would like to honor that by helping his daughter." Maria appeared in the doorway behind Meline, her gray hair mussed from sleep. "Mija, who is out there at this hour? And why have you not invited him inside? The mosquitoes are fierce tonight." "Maria, this is Nathan Forrester. He claims he wants to pay off our debt to the bank." Maria's eyes widened. Then she looked at Nathan with the sharp, assessing gaze of a woman who had seen too much of the world to be easily fooled. "Come inside, Senor Forrester," she said after a long moment. We do not have much, but there is coffee and some bread. Around the worn kitchen table, Nathan explained his proposal more fully. He would go to the bank first thing in the morning and pay the full $2,000. The ranch would remain entirely in Maline's name. He wanted no ownership, no stake, no claim of any kind. I still do not understand, Maline said, cradling her coffee cup like it might protect her from this strange turn of events. You could buy your own ranch with that kind of money. Why give it away? I have had my fill of owning things, Nathan replied. Been moving too long to want to settle anywhere just yet. And honestly, I do not think I deserve to build something new until I have made right what I damaged in the past. And what happens after? You just ride away into the sunset? That is the plan. I am headed to San Antonio, then maybe on to California. Always wanted to see the Pacific Ocean. Maria, who had been quietly observing from her chair in the corner, suddenly spoke up. Why not stay a while, senor? The ranch needs strong hands, and we cannot afford to hire help. You could work for your food and board while you decide where to go next. Maria, Maline protested, it is the truth, mija. You cannot run this place alone, and we cannot pay anyone. If Senor Forrester is willing to help for a few weeks, it would give us time to get back on our feet. Nathan looked thoughtful. I could stay a few weeks, he said slowly. Help get things in order before I move on, if that would be acceptable. We do not need charity, Maline said firmly, even though her heart was racing at the thought of not having to face the mountain of work alone. Not charity, Nathan corrected gently. Consider it earned wages for your father's mercy years ago, a debt paid through honest labor. Maline wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it. But practicality won. She thought about the fences that needed mending, the cattle that needed tending, the 100 other tasks she had been struggling to manage alone. She thought about what it would feel like to not be so utterly exhausted for the first time in months. Very well, she said reluctantly. If you are determined to do this, I will not stop you. But I insist on drawing up proper legal papers saying the money is a loan. A loan I will repay in full. Nathan's lips curved in a slight smile. If that makes you feel better, he agreed. Though I have no intention of collecting. They shook hands to seal the deal. His grip was warm and firm, calloused from years of hard work. And when his fingers wrapped around hers, Maline felt something spark in her chest that she quickly pushed away. This was business, nothing more. The next morning they rode into Brownsville together. The awkward silence between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maline still could not quite believe this was happening. Part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Nathan to reveal his true motives and prove that he was just like every other man who had ever offered her help. At the First National Bank, Silas Jenkins nearly fell off his chair when Nathan counted out $2,000 in gold coins and crisp banknotes. You are a very fortunate woman, Miss Winters, Jenkins remarked, his tone suddenly much more respectful than it had been 2 days ago. The debt is paid in full, Nathan said firmly. The foreclosure is canceled. I assume you will have the documents drawn up immediately. Of course, Mr. Forrester. Right away, Mr. Forrester. It was amazing how money changed the way people talk to you. Outside the bank, Maline stood blinking in the bright morning sun, struggling to process what had just happened. Thank you does not seem adequate, she finally managed. It is not necessary, Nathan replied simply. I told you I am just repaying a debt. Still, I insist on those loan papers. As you wish. They walked together toward the lawyer's office, their boots kicking up little puffs of dust from the dry street. Did you really strike it rich in Colorado? Maline asked, needing to fill the silence. Rich enough, Nathan said. Found a decent claim near Central City, worked it for 6 years, hired a good crew, built it into something profitable, then sold it to a mining company for more than I ever expected. And now you are just wandering? For now, thought I might see the Pacific Ocean. Never have. Why come back to Texas first? Nathan was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Unfinished business, he finally said. Needed to make things right before moving forward. Herbert Wilson, the town lawyer, was a heavy-set man with impressive mustaches and a fondness for long words. He drew up the papers Malene insisted upon with barely concealed confusion. A promissory note for $2,000, no interest, no specified repayment date. Both parties signed. Malene noticed Nathan's amused expression as he wrote his name. "You find this funny?" she asked. "Not funny," he said. "Just interesting. Most people in your situation would just take the money and say thank you. You insist on making it a business arrangement." "I do not take handouts," Malene said firmly. "I pay my debts." Something flickered in Nathan's blue eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "So did your father," he said quietly. "I can see where you get it." They left the lawyer's office together, stepping out into a world that suddenly looked different to Malene. Her ranch was safe. For the first time in months, she did not have to worry about losing everything. "Well," Nathan said, adjusting his hat against the bright sun, "I suppose I should get my things from the boarding house, unless you have changed your mind about me staying to help." Malene looked at him for a long moment. He was still a stranger, still someone she did not fully trust, still someone with a past that included violence and exile. But he was also someone who had just saved her home with no strings attached. Someone who could have ridden away and never looked back, but chose to stay and help instead. "Do you know how to mend fences?" she asked. "I have mended a few in my time. Can you handle cattle that have not seen proper care in months? I reckon I can manage. And you are not going to expect anything improper just because you are living on my property?" Nathan's expression turned serious. "Miss Winters, your father trusted me enough to give me a second chance when most men would have seen me hanged. I will not dishonor his memory by disrespecting his daughter. You have my word on that." Malene held his gaze for a long moment, searching for any hint of deception. She found none. "Very well then, Mr. Forrester. Get your things. We have a lot of work to do." As they parted ways temporarily, Malene heading back to the ranch and Nathan to collect his belongings, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. It was small and fragile, like a seedling pushing through cracked earth. But it was there. And for the first time since her daddy died, Malene Winters thought that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The first week of Nathan's presence at the Lazy W established a rhythm that Malene had not expected. He rose before dawn every single day, earlier than even Malene herself. By the time she came outside with her first cup of coffee, he was already at work, mending fences, feeding the remaining cattle, mucking out the barn, doing the 100 small tasks that had been piling up for months. He worked from sunrise to sunset without complaint, and he was good at it. Better than good. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent his life doing physical labor, who understood the land and the animals and the endless demands of ranch life. Malene worked alongside him when she could. At first it was awkward. They barely spoke beyond what was necessary. "Pass me that hammer. Hold this post steady. The water trough in the south pasture needs checking." But as the days passed, something shifted. They began to anticipate each other's movements. When Malene reached for a tool, Nathan was already handing it to her. When he needed help lifting a heavy post, she was there without being asked. It was strange working so closely with someone after months of struggling alone. Strange, but not unpleasant. In the evenings, after Maria had retired to her room, they often sat on the porch together, watching the stars emerge one by one. Those conversations started small. Talk about the work they had accomplished, plans for the next day, practical matters that kept them firmly in safe territory. But gradually the conversations grew deeper. "Tell me about Colorado," Malene said one evening, surprising herself with the question. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last traces of sunset were fading to purple. "It was hard," he finally said, "harder than I expected. The first winter nearly killed me. Came down from the mountains with frostbite on 3 fingers and nothing to show for 6 months of back-breaking work. But you stayed, did not have much choice, could not come back here, and I had already burned most of my other bridges. So I found another claim and tried again, and again, Must have failed a dozen times before things finally turned. What made you keep going? Nathan glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Stubborn, I suppose. And something your father said kept rattling around in my head, about being better than my worst mistake. Every time I wanted to give up, I heard his voice asking me if this was really the man I wanted to be. A quitter, a failure. He shook his head. Could not bear to prove him wrong, so I kept digging. Eventually I found a vein that actually had gold in it, instead of just wishful thinking. Malene felt something warm spread through her chest. She had not realized until that moment how much her father's words had meant to this man. He talked about you sometimes, she said quietly, when I came home from school for the summers. Not by name, but he would say things about people deserving second chances, about how the measure of a man is not what he does when he falls, but whether he gets back up. Nathan's jaw tightened. I think about that night a lot, he admitted. The fight. What I did to Tanner. I was young and stupid and full of anger that I did not know what to do with. What were you angry about? Nathan was silent for so long that Malene thought he might not answer. Everything, he finally said. Nothing. My father was a hard man. Liked his whiskey more than his family. My mother died when I was 12, and after that it was just him and me and his fists. I left home at 16 and never looked back. I did not know that. Not many people do. Nathan's voice was flat, carefully controlled. By the time I ended up in Brownsville, I had been drifting for years. Working ranch jobs here and there, never staying long, always moving before anyone could get too close. And then Tanner said something that night in the saloon. Something about drifters and good-for-nothing men who were not worth the dirt on his boots. Malene winced. It should not have mattered, Nathan continued. I had heard worse, but something in me just snapped. All that anger I had been carrying around for years, it all came out at once. And when I saw Tanner lying there bleeding, not moving, I knew I had finally become exactly what my father always said I would, worthless, dangerous, broken. You are not those things, Malene said quietly. I was not so sure back then. Nathan's voice softened. But your father seemed to think otherwise. And that meant more to me than I can explain. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had just shared something real. Why did you never marry? Malene asked suddenly, then immediately regretted the boldness of the question. Nathan did not seem offended. Never stayed in one place long enough, he said, and after what happened here, I was too focused on proving myself to think about building a life with someone else. By the time I had money and stability, I realized I did not know how to stop moving. And now? Now. He paused, looking at her in a way that made her breath catch. Now I am starting to wonder if I have been running from the idea of settling down instead of running towards something better. The words hung in the air between them. Malene did not know what to say, so she said nothing. But she thought about those words long after she went to bed that night. The second week brought new challenges. A section of fence on the north boundary had collapsed completely, leaving the cattle free to wander onto the neighboring property. Malene and Nathan spent 3 solid days rebuilding it, working from dawn until their hands were blistered and their muscles ached. It was brutal, exhausting work. But there was something satisfying about it, too. About watching the fence rise post by post, about creating something solid and lasting out of raw materials and pure determination. On the third evening, as they were finishing the last section, Malene's hammer slipped and caught her thumb. She bit back a curse and shook her hand, trying to will the throbbing pain away. Let me see. Nathan was beside her in an instant, his hands gentle as he examined the injury. It is fine, Malene said, trying to pull away. Just a bruise. But Nathan held on, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. You should soak it in cold water when we get back, he said, and take a break tomorrow. You have been pushing yourself too hard. We both have. Nathan's lips curved slightly. That is different. Why? Because you are a man and I am a delicate woman who cannot handle hard work? No. Because this is your ranch and I am just here to help. You have something to prove. I do not. Malene looked at him, surprised by the insight. He was right. She had been pushing herself mercilessly, driven by some deep need to show that she could handle everything on her own, that she did not need anyone's help or pity. But Nathan did not seem to pity her. He seemed to respect her, and that made all the difference. I suppose I could take a few hours off tomorrow, she admitted reluctantly. But only if you promised not to do anything too ambitious without me. Would not dream of it, he said, releasing her hand. For a moment they stood close enough that Malene could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the stubble darkening his jaw. Then Nathan stepped back, and the moment passed. We should head back before it gets too dark, he said. Maria will worry. Yes. Right. Of course. They rode home in comfortable silence, the setting sun painting the land in shades of orange and gold. And if their shoulders brushed occasionally as they rode side by side, neither of them mentioned it. But Malene noticed. She noticed everything about Nathan Forrester. The way he smiled when something amused him. The way he talked to the horses, low and gentle, like they could understand every word. The way he ate Maria's cooking with genuine appreciation, complimenting her on every meal. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. She noticed, and she tried very hard not to let it mean anything, but her heart had other ideas. On the 15th day of Nathan's stay at the Lazy W, Malene woke before dawn to the smell of rain. She lay in bed for a moment, confused, before realizing what she was sensing. Moisture in the air. For the first time in months, she threw on her clothes and ran outside, nearly colliding with Nathan on the porch. "Do you smell that?" she asked, breathless. "Rain coming," he said, his face turned toward the eastern sky where dark clouds were gathering. "A real storm by the look of it." They stood together, watching the clouds roll in, and when the first drops fell, Malene laughed out loud. She could not help it. After months of drought, of watching the land crack and wither, of praying for rain that never came, the feeling of water on her face was like a miracle. Nathan was laughing too, and when she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something she had not noticed before. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. It suited him. "Come on," he said, grabbing her hand. "We need to check the wash before it floods." They saddled up quickly and rode out into the gathering storm, checking the creek beds and drainage channels that would soon be carrying water for the first time in months. The rain was coming down steadily now, soaking through their clothes, turning the dusty ground to mud. But neither of them cared. This was life returning to the land. This was hope. By the time they returned to the ranch house, both of them were drenched to the bone and grinning like fools. Maria met them at the door with towels and a look of fond exasperation. "You will both catch your death," she scolded. "Change into dry clothes and come eat breakfast. The rain is not going anywhere." But as Malene changed out of her wet things, she could not stop smiling. Something had shifted in her heart, something she was not quite ready to name. But it felt like hope. And it felt like maybe, just maybe, Nathan Forrester was becoming more than just a hired hand paying off an old debt. The thunderstorm that had broken the drought continued for 3 days. Rain pounded the roof of the ranch house, turning the yard to mud and the creeks to rushing torrents. Lightning cracked across the sky at all hours, followed by thunder that shook the windows in their frames. It was exactly what the land needed, but it also meant work. On the second day of the storm, Malene and Nathan rode out to check the north pasture, where the main cattle trail crossed a creek that had been bone dry for months. Now it was a raging brown river. "We need to reinforce that crossing," Nathan shouted over the roar of the water. Otherwise, it will wash out completely, and the cattle will have no way to get to the south pasture. They worked side by side for hours, hauling rocks and fallen branches to create a natural barrier against the flooding. The rain made everything harder. The footing was treacherous, the wood slippery, their clothes soaked and heavy. But they made progress. By mid-afternoon, the worst of the crossing was secured. Meline straightened up, wiping rain from her eyes, and looked at the sky. The clouds were getting darker. Lightning flashed almost continuously now. "We should head back," Nathan said, following her gaze. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." They were halfway home when the full fury of the storm hit. Rain came down in sheets so thick that Meline could barely see Penny's ears in front of her. The wind howled like a living thing, whipping tree branches and sending debris flying through the air. Lightning struck a tree not 50 yards away, the crack so loud it seemed to split the world in two. Penny screamed and reared. Meline, who had ridden horses all her life, was caught completely off guard. She felt herself falling backward, saw the gray sky spinning above her, and then hit the ground with a force that drove all the air from her lungs. For a moment she could not move, could not breathe, could not think. Then Nathan was there, kneeling beside her in the mud, his face pale with fear. "Meline, are you hurt? Can you hear me?" She tried to sit up and gasped as pain shot up her right leg. "My ankle," she managed through gritted teeth. "I think I twisted it when I fell." Nathan's hands were gentle but thorough as he examined the joint, already swelling visibly even through her wet boot. "We need to get you out of this storm," he said. "The line shack is closer than the main house." Without waiting for permission, he scooped her into his arms and stood. "Put me down," Meline protested weakly. "I can walk." "No, you cannot. I can try." "Meline," his voice was firm but not unkind. "You weigh about as much as a newborn calf. Let me help you for once." She wanted to argue. Everything in her rebelled against being carried like some helpless damsel, but the throbbing in her ankle overruled her pride. She wrapped her arms around Nathan's neck and let him carry her through the storm, his body shielding her from the worst of the wind and rain. The line shack was a small structure her father had built years ago for exactly this kind of situation. One room with a narrow cot, a small stove, and some emergency supplies. Nathan kicked open the door and carried her inside, setting her down gently on the cot. "Stay here," he said. "I need to secure the horses." He was gone before she could respond, back out into the raging storm. Meline looked around the small space, memories flooding back. Her father had brought her here once during a bad storm when she was just a girl. He had told her stories to distract her from the thunder and made her laugh by pretending to be a grizzly bear. The memory made her eyes sting with tears she refused to let fall. Nathan returned a few minutes later, dripping wet but triumphant. "Horses are tied up under the lean-to," he reported. "They will be uncomfortable but safe." He knelt before the small stove and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. Soon a small blaze was crackling, filling the cramped space with warmth and light. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," Nathan said practically, his back still turned to her. "There are some old blankets in that trunk. You can wrap yourself in those." Meline felt her cheeks flush. This was hardly appropriate. A single woman alone with a man in a small cabin, both of them stripping off their wet clothing. But she was shivering uncontrollably, and common sense trumped propriety. "Turn around," she ordered. Nathan obeyed without comment. Meline struggled out of her wet outer clothing and wrapped herself in a scratchy wool blanket, keeping her chemise and underthings in place. It was not exactly decent, but it would have to do. "All right," she said when she was covered. "Your turn. I will not look." She heard the rustle of wet fabric, the sound of Nathan hanging his shirt and coat near the fire to dry. She kept her eyes firmly fixed on the opposite wall, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the storm. "Let me see that ankle," Nathan said, coming to kneel before her. He was shirtless, she realized with a jolt. She could see the firelight playing across his chest and shoulders, illuminating muscles and a few old scars. Meline jerked her gaze back to his face. "I am sure it is fine," she said, her voice coming out higher than intended. "It is not fine. It is swollen like a grapefruit. Let me look." His hands were gentle as he eased off her boot, and Meline bit back a cry of pain. "Not broken," Nathan pronounced after a careful examination, "but a bad sprain. You will need to stay off it for a few days at least." "I cannot afford to rest," she protested. "There is too much work." "You cannot afford not to rest." Nathan's eyes met hers steadily. "Push too hard now and you will be laid up for weeks instead of days." Outside, the storm raged on. Rain hammered the roof. Wind screamed through the gaps in the walls. Inside the small cabin, the fire crackled and popped. "Looks like we are stuck here for a while," Nathan observed, settling himself on the floor near the stove. He had found another blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders, but his chest was still visible, distracting Meline more than she wanted to admit. An awkward silence fell between them. "You must think I am terribly weak," Meline finally said, needing to break the tension. "Getting thrown from my horse in a little rain." Nathan looked at her in genuine surprise. "Weak is the last word I would use to describe you, Meline Winters." "What word would you use then?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Resilient," he said finally. "Stubborn. Proud. Sometimes too proud for your own good." He paused. "Beautiful." The word hung in the air between them. Meline felt her breath catch. "You should not say such things," she whispered. "Probably not," Nathan agreed. "But it is true all the same." They stared at each other across the small space, and the tension in the cabin had nothing to do with the storm outside. "Why did you really come back?" Meline asked finally. "The truth this time. Not just about my father." Nathan ran a hand through his still damp hair. "I told you about your father." "Yes, but that is not all, is it?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "I never forgot this place. Never forgot the people in it. When I heard about your father passing, when I heard rumors about the bank foreclosure, I could not just keep riding. I had the means to help, so I came. Just like that." "You rode hundreds of miles based on a rumor." "Sometimes a man follows his instincts," Nathan said simply. "And what are your instincts telling you now?" Meline's voice was barely above a whisper. Nathan moved closer, closing the distance between them until he was kneeling beside the cot. "They are telling me I should leave as soon as this storm passes," he said. "That staying would only complicate things. For both of us. Is that what you want? To leave?" His blue eyes held hers, and the intensity she saw there made her pulse race. "What I want, and what is right, are not always the same thing. What if they could be?" Meline surprised herself with her boldness. But something about this moment, the isolation, the storm, the man before her, made her reckless. What if staying was the right thing? Nathan reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "Meline, I am not the kind of man who stays. I never have been. Your father saw something in me that I'm still trying to live up to. I see it too," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then Nathan leaned forward. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it might have been imagined. When he started to pull away, Meline reached up, her hand finding the back of his neck, pulling him back to her. The second kiss was not gentle. It was 8 years of loneliness, months of growing admiration, the peculiar intimacy that comes from facing hardship together. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "This changes things," Nathan said, his voice rough. "Yes," Meline agreed. "It does." They sat in silence, hands intertwined, listening to the storm rage outside. Meline did not know what the morning would bring. did not know if Nathan would still want to stay, or if he would ride away and never look back. But in this moment, she was not alone, and that was enough. Morning brought clear skies and a reality they could not avoid. The storm had passed, leaving behind washed, clean air and a world that felt somehow new. But the feelings that had emerged during their night in the lion shack remained, hovering between them like something fragile and precious. They rode back to the ranch house in near silence, Nathan supporting Malene on his horse while leading Penny behind them. Her ankle was too swollen to bear weight, let alone fit in a stirrup. Maria took one look at them as they arrived and raised her eyebrows knowingly, but she said nothing as she helped Malene inside. For the next 3 days, Malene was confined to the house. Maria changed the subject every time she tried to get up, and Nathan had apparently been given strict instructions not to help her do anything more strenuous than drinking tea. So she sat by the window and watched. She watched Nathan work even harder than before, as if physical exhaustion might somehow clarify his thoughts. He fixed the barn door that had been hanging crooked for months. He dug a new drainage ditch behind the chicken coop. He reorganized the entire tool shed. He was avoiding her. She knew it. Maria knew it. Even the horses probably knew it. On the third evening, Malene had had enough. She hobbled out to the porch using a walking stick Maria had found for her, her ankle wrapped tightly in bandages. Nathan was sitting on the steps, cleaning his saddle by the fading light. He looked up when he heard her approach, guilt flickering across his face. "You should be resting," he said. "I have been resting for 3 days. Any more rest, and I will go out of my mind." She lowered herself carefully into the rocking chair her father used to favor. "You have been avoiding me," she said without preamble. Nathan set aside the saddle and finally met her eyes. "I thought we both could use some time to think. And have you thought about it?" "Have not thought about much else," he sighed. "I still think I should leave soon. What happened at the lion shack, it was not a mistake. But I'm not sure I am what you need." "Should I not be the judge of that?" Malene challenged. Nathan stood and moved closer, standing at the porch railing with his back to the sunset. "You have just saved your ranch. You need time to get back on your feet, to make your own way. You do not need another complication in your life." "What if I want that complication?" Malene's chin lifted stubbornly. "What if I see a man who came back to repay a debt when he could have just kept riding? Who has worked harder than anyone I have ever known to help save something that matters to me? Who has treated me with respect and honesty from the very first day?" Nathan's expression softened, but he did not speak. "All my life," Malene continued, "I have done what was expected of me. I went to school in Austin because my father wanted me educated. I came back to run the ranch because it was my duty. I nearly lost everything trying to do it alone because I was too proud to ask for help." She took a deep breath. "For once in my life, I want to choose something for myself. Something that is just for me." "Malene, let me finish. I am choosing you, Nathan Forrester. If you will stay, not because I need rescuing, not because I cannot manage on my own, but because for the first time in longer than I can remember, I do not want to be alone." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. The sun was setting behind him, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the growing darkness, his face was hard to read. "I have been moving for so long," he said finally. "I am not sure I remember how to stay still. Then we will learn together." Malene pushed herself up from the chair, balancing on her good foot. "I am not asking for forever. I am not asking you to give up your dreams of seeing the ocean. I am just asking for now, for long enough to see where this leads." He closed the distance between them, his hands gentle on her waist, steadying her. "Your father would probably come back to haunt me for this," he murmured. "No, he would not." Malene smiled up at him. "He would say you are finally becoming the man he always thought you could be." Their lips met in a kiss that felt like a promise, like a beginning. In the weeks that followed, life at the Lazy W Ranch began to change. Nathan moved from his small cabin near the main house into one of the spare bedrooms. Not Malene's bedroom. Despite everything, they were both too old-fashioned for that, but closer, near. They worked side by side every day, falling into an easy rhythm that felt like they had been partners for years. The ranch began to thrive. With the drought finally broken, and Nathan's tireless effort, the land gradually regained its vitality. The cattle grew sleek and healthy, the fences stood strong. Even the garden Maria kept behind the kitchen burst into new life. In town, people speculated. The shopkeeper Otto Schmidt mentioned to anyone who would listen that Nathan Forrester was practically living at the Lazy W. Eyebrows were raised, tongues wagged. Meline did not care. "Let them talk," she told Nathan, when he expressed concern about her reputation. "I am 26 years old. I have no parents to disapprove and no husband to object. If the good people of Brownsville have nothing better to do than gossip about my living arrangements, that is their problem, not mine." Nathan laughed at that, a real laugh that transformed his whole face. "You really are something else, Meline Winters." "So I have been told." Autumn came, painting the land in shades of gold and brown. One afternoon, news reached them that Richard Tanner had died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. Nathan went quiet when he heard. "You should go to the funeral," Meline said gently. "Pay your respects. I do not know if that would be welcome. I think it would be more welcome than you expect." Nathan attended the funeral, standing at the back of the church, keeping his distance from the family gathered near the front. But afterward, as the mourners were dispersing, an elderly woman approached him. It was Margaret Tanner, Richard's widow. "You are Nathan Forrester," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Richard forgave you a long time ago," Mrs. Tanner said simply. "He told me so more than once, said George Winters was right about you, said you just needed a chance to become who you were meant to be." Nathan swallowed hard. "I am not sure I have earned that forgiveness, ma'am." Margaret Tanner looked at him with clear, kind eyes. "You are here, are you not? You could have stayed away, could have pretended the past never happened, but you came back and you stayed. That says something about the kind of man you have become." She patted his arm. "Go live your life, young man. Richard would have wanted that." When Nathan returned to the ranch that evening, Meline was waiting for him on the porch. She said nothing, just took his hand as he sat down beside her. They watched the stars come out, one by one. "I have been thinking," Nathan said after a long while, "about staying. Not just for now, but for good." Meline's heart seemed to stop. "What changed your mind?" "At the funeral today, I realized something. I have spent 8 years trying to outrun my past, trying to become someone different in a different place. But maybe the real change happens when you stop running and face who you are right where you are." "And who are you, Nathan Forrester?" He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the moonlight. "A man who wants to build something that lasts. A man who has fallen in love with a stubborn, beautiful woman and the land she has fought so hard to save." Meline's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had spoken of love. "Are you sure? You have always said you were not meant to stay in one place." Nathan squeezed her hand. "Maybe I just had not found the right place, or the right person to stay for." He paused. "I am not saying it will be easy. We are both too stubborn for easy. But I would like to try, if you would have me." Instead of answering with words, Meline leaned forward and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that one gesture. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "Is that a yes?" Nathan asked. "That is a what took you so long," Meline replied. They were married in the spring of 1877. It was a simple ceremony in the Brownsville church, with Maria standing as witness and Otto Schmidt and his wife in attendance. A few other townspeople came, more out of curiosity than anything else, but Meline did not mind. She had everything she needed. The church was decorated with wildflowers that Maria had gathered at dawn. Meline wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her slimmer frame. The lace was yellowed with age, and the hem had been mended twice. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw her mother looking back at her. Nathan wore a new suit he had ordered from San Antonio. It was dark blue, the color of his eyes, and when Malene walked down the aisle toward him, she saw those eyes fill with something that made her heart swell. The minister spoke the words that had been spoken for countless couples before them. Words about love and honor and faithfulness. But it was the words they spoke to each other that mattered most. "I promise to work beside you," Nathan said, his voice steady. "To stand with you in times of trouble and times of joy. To be your partner in all things for as long as I draw breath." "I promise to trust you," Malene replied. "To share my heart and my home with you. To build something lasting together." They exchanged simple gold bands that Nathan had commissioned from the jeweler in town, and then the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Nathan kissed her right there in front of God and everyone, and Malene laughed against his lips because she had never been so happy in her entire life. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch. Maria had been cooking for days, preparing enough food to feed half the county. Tables were set up in the yard, draped with white cloth and decorated with more wildflowers. People came from all over. Neighboring ranchers who had known Malene's father. Townspeople who had watched her struggle through the drought and foreclosure. Even Martin Crawford, the man who had proposed to her 3 times, showed up with an expensive gift and congratulations that seemed almost genuine. Malene moved through the celebration in a daze, accepting good wishes and answering questions she barely heard. Her hand kept finding Nathan's. Every time their fingers intertwined, she felt a little thrill of disbelief. This was real. This was her life now. As evening fell and the guests began to drift away, Nathan and Malene walked together to the edge of the property, looking out over the land that was now theirs together. "I never thought this would happen," Malene said quietly. "When you first showed up offering to pay my debt, I was so suspicious. So certain there had to be a catch." "I know," Nathan smiled. "You were determined not to trust me. It was one of the things I admired about you, actually. You had every reason to be cautious, and you did not let desperation make you foolish. I almost turned you away, but you did not." "No." Malene leaned against him. "I suppose my father's voice was in my head, telling me to give people a chance." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear. "I have something for you," Nathan said finally. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Malene recognized it immediately. The loan agreement. The promissory note she had insisted upon, documenting the $2,000 she owed him. "I think we can consider this paid in full," Nathan said, tearing the paper neatly in half. "Do you not agree?" "I'm not sure," Malene replied, trying to keep her face serious. "That was a lot of money. Maybe I should keep paying you back for the rest of my life. I can live with that arrangement," Nathan murmured, pulling her close. Their wedding night was quiet and tender. The house that had felt so empty after Malene's father died now felt full, not with noise or commotion, but with the presence of someone who belonged there. Nathan held her in the darkness, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I never thought I would have this," he admitted. "A home. Someone to share it with. I spent so many years convinced I was not the type of man who deserved these things. And now I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve them." In the months that followed, the Lazy W Ranch flourished as it had not done in years. Nathan and Malene worked side by side from dawn until dusk. And though the labor was hard, it never felt like a burden. There was something deeply satisfying about building something together, about watching their efforts bear fruit. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the heavier work. Young men from town who had heard about the wages Nathan was willing to pay. The ranch house was expanded, with a new bedroom added on and the kitchen modernized. Maria, who had threatened to retire a dozen times, continued to run the household with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. "You are different now," she told Malene one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. "Happier, more at peace." "I am," Malene agreed. "I did not realize how heavy the burden was until I had someone to share it with." Maria smiled. "Your father would be pleased, Mija. He always wanted you to find someone worthy of you, someone who would see your strength and admire it instead of being threatened by it. You think Nathan is worthy? I think he has worked hard to become worthy. Maria's eyes were wise. That matters more than if he started out that way. That winter was mild, and the following spring brought news that changed everything. Malene was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening after dinner, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and fear. Nathan stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "A baby," he said when he finally set her down. "We are going to have a baby. You are happy? Happy?" "Malene, I am terrified. I have never been a father. I do not know the first thing about raising a child, but I am also happier than I have ever been in my life." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet. "We will figure it out together," he said, "like we figure everything else out." Their son was born in the autumn of 1878. They named him George, after Malene's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes, and from the moment he drew his first breath, both of his parents were completely and utterly in love with him. Malene watched Nathan hold their son for the first time, saw the wonder and fear and overwhelming love in his expression, and felt something shift in her heart. This was her family. This man who had come back to repay a debt and ended up giving her everything she never knew she needed. This child who carried both of their legacies in his tiny hands. "I wish my father could see him," she whispered. Nathan looked up from George's sleeping face. "I think he knows," he said quietly. "I think wherever he is, he knows." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter. They named her Elizabeth after Nathan's mother, the one he barely remembered but always carried in his heart. She was a tiny thing with a fierce cry and a grip that would not let go. "A fighter," Maria declared approvingly, "like her mother." The years that followed were good ones. Not always easy, of course. Ranching never was. There were droughts and floods, good years and lean ones, cattle prices that rose and fell with the whims of the market. But Nathan and Malene faced every challenge together, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. The Lazy W grew into one of the most prosperous ranches in the region. They bought additional land as it became available, expanded the cattle herd, and hired more hands to help with the growing operation. Nathan proved to be a shrewd businessman as well as a skilled rancher. He negotiated contracts with meat packers in San Antonio and invested their profits wisely. The rough drifter who had ridden into town with nothing but his past had become a respected member of the community. Malene managed the household and the books with the same determination she brought to everything. She made sure their children were educated, hiring a tutor to teach them reading and writing and arithmetic. She hosted dinners for neighboring ranchers and their wives, building connections that benefited the ranch. But she never forgot where they had come from. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Nathan had paid off her debt, she made a special dinner. They would sit together after the children were in bed and talk about how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked one year when George was 7 and Elizabeth was 5. "Staying here instead of seeing the Pacific Ocean?" Nathan thought about it the way he always did, giving her question the consideration it deserved. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like," he admitted. "To stand on the shore and watch the waves come in. To see something that vast and powerful." He took her hand. "But then I look at you, at our children, at this land we have built together. And I know I made the right choice. Maybe we could go someday. All of us. Take the children on an adventure." Nathan smiled. "I would like that. When George and Elizabeth are a little older, we could take the train to California and see the ocean as a family." It became a dream they shared, something to look forward to when the daily demands of ranch life felt overwhelming. Someday, they would tell each other, "Someday we will see the ocean." Young George grew into a serious boy with a quick mind and a love for the land that matched his mother's. He followed his father around the ranch, asking endless questions about cattle and horses and how to tell when rain was coming. "He is a natural," Nathan told Malene one evening, watching their son help one of the ranch hands with a difficult foal. "He understands the animals in a way you cannot teach. He gets that from you, maybe. But he gets his stubbornness from you. Malene laughed. Is that supposed to be a complaint? Not in the slightest. That stubbornness has saved this ranch more than once. Elizabeth was different from her brother. Where George was serious and focused, she was curious and wild. She would rather climb trees than practice her letters, rather race across the fields than sit quietly with her sewing. She is going to give us gray hairs, Malene predicted. She is going to be extraordinary, Nathan countered. Like her mother. Maria, who had been threatening to retire for over a decade, finally agreed to take a smaller role in the household. A younger woman from town was hired to help with the cooking and cleaning, though Maria still supervised everything with a critical eye. I am too old for this much work, she grumbled, even as she continued to rise before dawn and stay up past dark. You are too stubborn to stop, Malene told her fondly. That too, mija. That too. The summer that George turned 10 and Elizabeth turned 8, tragedy struck. A fever swept through the region, claiming lives with terrifying speed. The doctor in Brownsville worked around the clock, but there was little he could do for most cases. Maria fell ill first. Malene nursed her for 3 days, barely sleeping, forcing water and broth past the old woman's cracked lips. You should rest, Maria whispered on the second night. I am old. My time is coming soon anyway. Do not talk like that. It is the truth, mija. I have lived a good long life. I saw your mother born and watched you grow into a woman. I saw you find love and build a family. There is nothing left that I need to do. There is plenty left, Malene insisted, tears streaming down her face. You need to see George, graduate from school. You need to dance at Elizabeth's wedding. You cannot leave yet. Maria's hand, thin and fragile as paper, found Malene's. I am not leaving, mija. I will always be with you. In the beans I taught you to make, in the songs I sang to your children, in the garden I planted behind the kitchen. She closed her eyes. Tell Nathan thank you for me, for making you happy, for giving you the family you deserved. Maria died the next morning just as the sun was coming up. Nathan held Malene while she cried, not saying anything, just being there the way he always was. They buried her next to Malene's parents, under the old oak tree that had stood on the property since before the ranch was built. The whole town came to pay their respects. Maria had touched many lives over her decades in Brownsville. She was my second mother, Malene told Nathan that night, her voice raw from crying. She raised me after my mother died. She held this family together through everything. She loved you, Nathan said quietly. That was obvious to anyone who knew her. I do not know how to do this without her. You are not doing it without her. Nathan pulled her close. Everything she taught you is still here. Everything she gave you lives on in how you raise our children, how you run this house, how you love. Malene buried her face in his shoulder and let herself grieve. In the weeks that followed, she found that Nathan was right. Maria was gone, but her presence lingered everywhere. In the recipes Malene had memorized. In the garden that still bloomed with vegetables and herbs. In the little customs and rituals that had become part of the family's daily life. One evening, Malene found Elizabeth in the kitchen, attempting to make tortillas the way Maria had taught her. They do not look right, Elizabeth said, frustrated. Maria's were always perfect. Maria practiced for 50 years, Malene told her daughter. You have been practicing for 50 minutes. She moved to stand beside Elizabeth, guiding her hands through the familiar motions. Like this, she said. Roll them thin, but not too thin. Cook them until you see the bubbles, then flip. Together they made a stack of tortillas that were not quite perfect, but were close enough. Maria would be proud of you, Malene said. Elizabeth's eyes were bright with tears. I miss her. So do I, baby. So do I. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan and Malene stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the land in shades of gold and crimson. The same colors as the evening he had first ridden up to offer his help. The same view, but everything else was different. Any regrets? Malene asked, leaning against his shoulder. Nathan looked down at her, at the face he had grown to love more with each passing year. There were a few more lines around her eyes now, a few strands of gray in her dark hair. But to him, she was more beautiful than ever. About staying? Not one. Even though you never did see the Pacific Ocean? He smiled, wrapping his arm around her waist. There is still time for that. Maybe next summer when George is a little older. We could all go together as a family. I would like that. A family adventure. They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of evening settling over the ranch. Somewhere in the house behind them, George was practicing his reading aloud while Elizabeth argued with the new housekeeper about bedtime. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Nathan and Malene lay together in the darkness. "I have been thinking," Nathan said quietly. "About what?" "About how I ended up here. About everything that had to happen for us to find each other." Malene turned to look at him. "You mean the fight with Tanner?" "That. And your father's kindness. And the drought that almost destroyed everything. And that storm that trapped us in the line shack." He reached for her hand. "So many things could have gone differently. I could have never come back to Texas. You could have turned me away when I offered to help. We could have ignored what we felt and gone our separate ways. But we did not. No, we did not." Nathan brought her hand to his lips. "Sometimes I think about all those possible lives where we never met. Where I am still drifting from place to place and you are married to Martin Crawford." Malene shuddered. "Please do not even joke about that. My point is that I am grateful for every twist of fate that brought us together, for every choice we made to stay. I am grateful, too." Malene moved closer, resting her head on his chest. "You know, when you first showed up at my door, I thought you were going to be trouble." "Was I?" "The best kind," she admitted. "The kind that changes everything." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the way they did every night. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the Texas sky, keeping watch over the land and the family that had made it home. The next morning brought the usual chaos of ranch life. George wanted to help brand the new calves. Elizabeth had somehow gotten her dress caught on a fence post and torn a hole in the skirt. One of the ranch hands reported that a section of fence in the north pasture needed mending. Again, Nathan and Malene divided the tasks between them with the ease of long practice. "I will handle the branding," Nathan said. "You deal with Elizabeth's dress." "That seems like an unfair division of labor," Malene replied. "Branding is dangerous. Sewing is just tedious. You clearly have not tried to make Elizabeth sit still for more than 5 minutes." Malene conceded the point. "Fine. But you are helping with dinner tonight." It was a normal day, ordinary in every way. But that was the life they had built together. A life of ordinary days strung together like beads on a string, each one precious precisely because it was not dramatic or dangerous or uncertain. A life where tomorrow was almost guaranteed to come, where there would be someone beside you when it did. That evening, George came in from the branding operation covered in dust and grinning from ear to ear. "I did it," he announced proudly. "I branded 3 calves all by myself. Papa said I am a natural." "Is that so?" Malene looked at Nathan for confirmation. "The boy is better at it than most of the hired hands," Nathan admitted. "He has steady hands and a way with animals. You should have seen how calm the calves were when he approached them." George beamed. "I want to work the ranch when I grow up, just like you and Papa." "There are other options," Malene reminded him gently. "You could go to school in Austin like I did. See more of the world." "Why would I want to see more of the world when everything I love is right here?" Nathan caught Malene's eye and smiled. It was exactly the kind of thing he might have said once, before he learned that home was not a place you ran from, but a place you chose to stay. As the years passed, Nathan often reflected on the strange path that had led him here. A young man's hot temper, a fight in a saloon, a moment of violence that could have ruined everything. And then grace, unexpected and undeserved. George Winters had seen something in that angry young man that no one else had bothered to look for. He had offered a second chance when justice demanded punishment. And now, years later, That act of mercy had rippled outward in ways that George could never have imagined. His ranch was thriving, not failing. His daughter was happy, not alone. His grandchildren were growing up strong and confident, surrounded by love. The debt that Nathan had come to repay could never truly be paid. But that was all right. Some debts were not meant to be settled. They were meant to be passed on. And Nathan knew that he would spend the rest of his life teaching his children what George Winters had taught him. That every person deserves a second chance. That the measure of a man is not the mistakes he makes, but how he rises after falling. That love freely given is the most powerful force in the world. True to their promise, the summer that George turned 16 and Elizabeth turned 14, the Forrester family finally made the journey west to see the Pacific Ocean. They left the ranch in the capable hands of their foreman, a steady young man named Thomas, who had been with them for nearly a decade. The train journey to California took several days, but none of them minded. For Nathan, it was a chance to finally see the ocean he had dreamed of for so long. For Malene, it was a chance to give her family an adventure they would remember forever. For George and Elizabeth, it was simply the most exciting thing that had ever happened. The train wound through mountains and deserts, through small towns and growing cities. They saw landscapes they had never imagined, met people from places they had only read about in books. And then, finally, they reached the coast. Nathan stood on the beach at Santa Monica, watching the waves roll in, one after another, endless and eternal. He had imagined this moment for more than 20 years, but the reality was better than anything he had imagined. Not because of the ocean itself, though that was magnificent. The vast blue expanse stretching to the horizon, the sound of the waves, the smell of salt in the air. What made it perfect was who he was sharing it with. Malene stood beside him, her hand in his. George and Elizabeth were running along the shore, shrieking with delight as the cold water washed over their bare feet. His family. Was it worth the wait? Malene asked quietly. Nathan thought about the question. He thought about the angry young man he had been, always running, never staying. He thought about the gold fields of Colorado, the hard work and harder winters. He thought about the day he rode back into Brownsville, intending to pay a debt and then keep moving. He thought about everything he would have missed if he had kept running. No, he said finally. Malene looked at him in surprise. It was not worth waiting, he explained. I should have brought you here years ago. We should have made this trip when the children were small. He smiled. But it is worth being here now. With you. With them. That is worth everything. They stayed in California for 2 weeks longer than originally planned. They walked on the beach every day. They ate seafood from little shacks along the boardwalk. They watched the sun set over the Pacific and rise over the mountains. And they talked about the future. George shared his plans to take over the ranch someday, to expand it, to try new breeding techniques he had read about in agricultural journals. He was serious and focused, already thinking like a businessman. Elizabeth talked about wanting to teach school, maybe in Brownsville, maybe somewhere else. She had inherited her mother's love of books and her father's restless spirit. Whatever you choose, Nathan told both of them, we will support you. But remember that home will always be waiting for you. No matter how far you travel, you can always come back. They were words he wished someone had said to him when he was young. Words he had learned too late, but was grateful to pass on. On their last evening in California, Nathan and Malene walked along the beach alone while the children packed their things at the hotel. Thank you, Malene said. For what? For staying? For choosing us? For becoming the man my father knew you could be. Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her. The setting sun painted her face in shades of gold and rose. She was in her early 40s now, with lines around her eyes and gray streaking her hair. But to him, she was still the stubborn, beautiful woman who had challenged him to be better. I did not become anything, he said. I just stopped running long enough to find out who I already was. Your father saw it. You saw it. I just had to catch up. He kissed her, there on the beach with the Pacific Ocean as their witness. I love you, Malene Forrester, he said. More today than the day I married you. More tomorrow than today. I love you too, she replied. Always have, always will. The story of how Nathan Forrester paid the debt on Malene Winter's ranch and asked for nothing in return became something of a legend in Brownsville over the years. People told it at dinner parties and church socials, embellishing details with each retelling. The amount of money grew larger, the storm grew fiercer, the love story grew more romantic. But Nathan and Malene knew the true story was both simpler and more complex than any legend. It was the story of a man given a second chance and a woman brave enough to let him stay. It was the story of debts repaid and gifts freely given. It was the story of two people choosing each other every single day, through good times and hard times and everything in between. Nathan lived to see both of his children married. George took over the ranch as planned, bringing in a sweet girl from San Antonio as his wife. They gave Nathan and Malene 3 grandchildren, each one more precious than the last. Elizabeth became a teacher in Brownsville, just as she had hoped. She married a young doctor and filled their house with books and laughter. The Lazy W Ranch continued to prosper, growing into one of the largest operations in South Texas. The Winter name, now joined with Forrester, became synonymous with hard work, fair dealing, and community spirit. And through it all, Nathan and Malene remained at the center, the foundation on which everything else was built. On their 40th wedding anniversary, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset the way they had done 1,000 times before. Nathan's hair was white now, his hands spotted with age, but his eyes were still that striking blue, and when he smiled, the years fell away. You know, he said, I came back to Brownsville to pay a debt. I thought that would free me to keep moving. Malene leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. And instead I found something I never knew I was looking for. He kissed the top of her head. Home, he said quietly. I found home. Malene closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his body beside her, the gentle Texas breeze on her face. She thought about her father, who had given a troubled young man a second chance all those years ago. She thought about Maria, who had held the family together through so much. She thought about the drought and the foreclosure, and the day a stranger rode up to her door with an offer that seemed too good to be true. And she thought about all the years since, the work and the love and the children and the grandchildren, the ordinary days that had added up to an extraordinary life. Worth it, she murmured, every bit of it. Nathan held her closer. Every single moment, he agreed. Above them, the stars were beginning to appear, the same stars that had watched over this land for centuries, the same stars that would continue to shine long after they were gone. But the light they had created, the love they had built, would endure. In their children and grandchildren, in the land they had saved and nurtured, in the story that would be told for generations to come. A story about second chances and new beginnings, about debts of the heart that could never be fully repaid, about finding home in the last place you expected to look, and about love, steady and true, that grew not from grand gestures, but from the simple daily choice to stay. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.